Welcome to Founder Stories, where we dive into the journeys of cybersecurity leaders, from first-time founders to industry veterans. Each story reveals the passion, resilience, and problem-solving spirit that drives innovation forward. Whether it's tackling financial challenges, conquering regulations, or building great company culture, these founders have insights and advice that inspire. Let's hear their stories. Howdy, folks. Welcome to Founder Stories TV, the only TV show where we interview exclusively cybersecurity founders about their trials, their tribulations, their travels, and their traumas. With us today is Umaimah, aka UK, Umaimah Khan. She goes by UK, and she is the CEO of Opal Security. Umaimah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Allan.
You ready to dive into some questions?
Let's do it.
All right. I'm going to start with an easy one here, hopefully easy one, which is in your founder journey, what obstacle did you face that you could not have predicted, right? Everybody kind of has this theory, oh, it's going to be hard to raise money. It's going to be hard to sell. It's going to be da-da-da-da. What, you had the ones you predicted and then something you stumbled into that you, in fact, did not predict.
Oh, boy. I thought you said you were starting off easy, but okay. Well, there's a lot of the standard wisdom that applies, but I think one thing that I found was an obstacle that I wasn't prepared for was actually the importance of optics. So, maybe that's unique to me as a founder. I've always really prided myself on being sort of ghost in the shell. I like it when things almost feel like magic and people are like, why is this working? And, I'm also an engineer by background. There's always a little bit of that. If you build it, they will come bias if it's good enough substance over style. But the reality is, I think when you build a business, so much of it is about putting your best foot forward and being able to tell that narrative. And I would say that was honestly the biggest obstacle for me. I can remember so many points over the last 2 years where I would just have these conversations internally, externally, sideways, where I would just be like, what do you mean? It's obvious. What are you talking about? I even remember when we raised our last round, I was like, all right, everyone, we did it. Sure. It's good. It's great. We got the terms we wanted. Let's keep going. And I think setting a narrative is really important because it helps people contextualize, marketing matters, telling the story of why you exist, where you're going, how you get there, connecting the dots, especially even as you scale as a business. And that was very much just in full self-awareness, not my style. It was very much if it's obviously good, you knock on the tires a little bit, you kick it, and you're like, oh yeah, that's solid. Let's keep going. And I think that's a very engineer mindset, whereas building a business, it's a little bit more holistic.
Right. So I'm hearing two narratives there. I'm hearing sort of a tension between introversion and extroversion, although you feel very extroverted to me. You get credit with me anyway for having that presence, right? That CEO presence. But I think the engineers aren't used to having to turn that on. Is that a skill you've kind of developed over time? Because I'm feeling it right now. It seems like you have it.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that. I think authenticity and passion, especially when you're doing something difficult, is something that's really innate to not just founders or CEOs, but a lot of early startup teams. I would say, we can chat about the discourse of founder mode and things like that. But that's really, I see that more of an attribute that extends beyond just the founder or the CEO. And being able to cultivate that in sort of a larger sort of sphere is a skill. And for me, I think personally, learning that and learning to kind of utilize that on behalf of the company was definitely a journey. It impacts so many things, right? It's everything from how you hire to how you communicate the vision to how you sell to how you raise. And some of those things, there's overlaps, everyone in an early team hires, for example. And I'd say I am an introvert by nature, but I think I'm excited about what I do and the team is excited about what they do, and sort of leaning into that is something that I believe really strongly in encouraging in folks. I was just joking with you actually right before we started this that my team was very loudly and passionately discussing product right outside the door. And,
Good.
I think that's a good thing. I'm glad to see people really kind of jazzed up and wanting to solve things.
I like that, and the excitement is contagious all directions, right? In other words, as the CEO, to your point, you want to be all excited and get your team all excited, but it rubs off on your customers too. If the whole team is that passionate about what you do, people are going to notice that. I mean, I'm a purchasing CISO, right? I can tell within seconds if the salesperson on the call is actually passionately believing in their product or not, right? You can, that stuff's contagious. But that brings up another point. It kind of segues into the next question rather well. Here you are, passionate about what you're doing. You've built this awesome thing. You believe in this awesome thing. How hard is it to turn that passion off? Like, are you just in 24/7 passion mode? Is there a way to dial it back? Do you find yourself at cocktail parties just being in founder mode? Like.
Yeah, it's a really great question. Again, very specific to my journey. I came to Opal talking at a party about identity. So I had a moment where I could turn it off even less than I do now. Like I would literally, like anyone and their mother, like I would corner them and just
This is what we're doing.
And it's just like, I don't understand. Do you not understand this is a problem? Like, I understand this is a problem. I'm tired of seeing this as a problem. And people would just be like, no, like either I don't believe this, like this is a solved problem. Why are you so obsessed with this? And I would say that like that quality, I think it's really precious to early teams, like that kind of obsessiveness. But there's also kind of a need as you scale to sort of realize like where to like hit the accelerator and where maybe it's not the end of the world. And so, I guess in the spirit of the question, I don't know if I can always turn it off, but I've become more aware over time where maybe that's not the intensity that one needs to bring to a situation.
Okay.
And I think that's really important because when you do have these sort of high energy, like passionate teams, it can be hard to let things go, right? And one of the hardest parts about scaling any business, not just even in cybersecurity, is you do have to kind of make these commitments to what you're going to do well and maybe not do so well. And that's really what the nature of a trade-off is, right? And that second part is hard to really feel. But I don't think like you ever really stop thinking about what you're doing.
Right. So you build this passionate team and you let the passion flow, and you have to make, to your point, these smart compromises. You have to say to yourself, we can't be 100% of all the things, all the places, all the time. We have to decide we're going to focus on A and let B, not be as 100% for a while. And that's an agility, because today it might be this one you focus on and that one not, and then suddenly some new giant customer shows up, a whale shows up, or whatever might happen, and you find yourself pivoting and shifting. And to me, there's a startup experience, there's a startup mindset of agility. That folks seem to be able to jump back and forth on those kinds of things a lot more readily. Have you found that in your own experience? Do you, when you're hiring leaders for your company, like you're hiring your next whatever, CMO, CRO, CEO, COO, whatever, not CEO, you're hiring whoever you're hiring, are you going to look for startup experience specifically? Do you feel like that's something that can be gained? Is that an acculturation that can be gained, or is that something that's kind of I'd much rather have that experience out of the chute?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and I'm sure like a lot of founders there's a little bit of a if you know, you know attitude about this. I kind of break it down into a couple of different components. So there's, I think overall, and not even just for startups or early stage startups, a need for a lot of adaptability in leadership roles these days. Like there's a lot of moving parts, there's technological shifts, like just like the pace of growth just in general has accelerated. And I think leadership period needs to be fairly adaptable compared to like even 15 years ago. And startups tend to be crucibles where that gets tested, like specifically two qualities, like learning index and adaptability, like people who can kind of understand and keep up with the pace of things and move forward. It's not always like a given, but oftentimes if you've made it through the ringer, you've probably like sort of learned how to adapt in those modes. The second thing you learn how to do, I think, is prioritize. And prioritization at like say a 10-person startup looks very different from a 50-person, looks very different from a 100-person. And that's a really tough thing to teach. So I would say the thing I look for in stage appropriateness for leadership is, can you parameterize, can you normalize what's happening right now such that you can have the correct judgment to make trade-offs and decisions, because there won't always be someone to help you make them, and hire for people and teach the overall team. So sometimes I use this analogy with folks. You're going to make mistakes in a startup. Like nothing is perfect. Nothing will ever be at your founder mode level of like taste or quality. There will be points where you're losing your shit. Like, pardon my language. But the reality is, if you don't kind of make that explicit, and there's folks as you're growing the team, it can be tough for people to understand, is something really wrong, or is this part of normal startup life? And so it's a little bit like, you're climbing Mount Everest, you're telling people this is what happens at base camp. This is what happens at 10K feet. This is what happens at 10K feet. And I think that's really a quality that to me is important looking at past startup experience. Like, how much can you yourself, how much intellectual confidence and experience do you have to normalize the journey for other folks so they also understand, learn to make those trade-offs, right? Like one piece I say here often is like, or I often think about when it comes to stage appropriateness is it's very clear in the Valley especially that there are good startup DNAs and not so good startup DNAs, which is to say you can be at a startup, it can have all of the right characteristics like number of people, number of funding, et cetera, but you'll actually notice that good founders often come out of like a smaller set of companies themselves, right?
Yeah.
And that's because theory is like those folks actually get to see and understand and get these things parameterized for them, so they actually learn how to ease into this and like build like the skill set for actually working in a startup, as opposed to just being along for the ride and white knuckling it, basically.
I love this this normalization paradigm, because it's much more subtle than simply oh, you're experienced with A and B round, I'm not going to hire you when I'm D round, or you're a large company person, I'm not going to hire you at C round, or whatever the various. It's not just about the specific experience in the journey. It's about that self-awareness, that normalization process, and that ability to articulate all that as well, right?
Yeah, I think it's look, these are very ambiguous things. Oftentimes, if you're building a startup, it's hard. You don't know what's going to happen, and you're kind of in it, right? And having folks who understand that and they can kind of tease apart, like, what's normal startup versus what are things we need to debug, and being able to teach that to the team, I think is like a very, very rare and good quality.
I like that. I like that a lot. So let's blow it up to the bigger world. So every startup is solving a problem, and usually a startup is aligned with a specific product, or maybe up to maybe like 3 products, but they're all kind of in the same area, and everyone can articulate pretty well. I've never met a startup CEO who couldn't give me the elevator pitch on here's what my product is and here's what it does, right? So this is a more subtle question than that. This is a little more nuanced than that. There's a cybersecurity ecosystem, and you guys plug into it, right? How do you see Opal Security as plugging into that cybersecurity ecosystem? And we can talk about the technology piece, but I want to hear about the broader fit into the world of cybersecurity as well.
Yeah. I think so taking a step back, cybersecurity, it's such an interesting landscape. There are so many strange, complex, organic and inorganic sort of like phenomena like that we're just sort of saddled with today that I'm sure we could spend like hours talking about. But it's like this strange combination of both like sort of technological prowess and sort of the dynamics of the free market. I would actually, the industry that cybersecurity reminds me the most of, frankly, is actually pharma. Like it has a lot of parallels to the pharmaceutical industry, in that oftentimes there's like this kind of core of R&D talent that is able to sort of like bring something new to the world. And then there's like these like kind of massive distribution channels. There's this like consolidation of big players. There's like scrappy like young teams that come together and like do research and like try to figure out like, how to bring things to market. When I zoom out, like one of the things I love about being in this space is like, I actually think like I'm really excited to see like kind of more driven, intellectually curious, like folks come to this space, because I think cybersecurity is going to become more and more important in the next couple of years, right? I think whenever you have a major technological shift, cybersecurity comes to the fore. It stops being just a check the box question, but actually an opportunity to kind of reset the landscape and understand, what are we solving for? What's changing? Do we actually understand how the world works? And for us, like kind of taking a step back, like one of the theses I have is like right now it's really, really hard to really say with high fidelity where the risk is in a changing landscape. But there's like kind of these two constants. Like there's who and what, like who has access to what, right? And we've actually done a pretty good job on the what historically because we understand like an asset is an asset, like let's protect the asset. The who is like actually a more complicated thing because it often requires thinking through productivity. It's not always aligned with like the incentives of growing a business quickly. It's sort of emerging as a security vector, if that makes sense. Whereas before it's been more of a process vector or productivity vector, like giving access to people and provisioning them or just tracking the life cycle. And it's exciting to see like now people are taking identity as a security first like play seriously. I fault note, like I mean the reality is you couldn't have 10 years ago, like this, like the landscape was so complex and we were saddled with what we had that you just kind of had to like plug into what makes sense, if that if that's correct. And I think that right now there's like a lot of moving pieces. There's there's some consolidation happening. There's like this like overall desire in the industry to just like have visibility. There's like a need for like taking the best practices of orchestration and monitoring from other industries and bringing them here. And there's an opportunity to kind of like reset the table. And I have a lot of conviction about this, like because I think like overall like technology has gotten to the point where we can develop enough context rapidly that like we can actually do something quite interesting here and future proof it, which is the other thing I think that's often missing for security. It's so easy to fall prey to the short termism of like solving a point, either it's a point solution in place or like just quick profit in place, that it's like really, really tough to sort of like embody that sense of like, nope, we're in it for the long haul. Like we're actually going to set the fundamentals for something that will scale. And so to me, I think what we're trying to do is like, without going into elevator pitch or anything, is like really not just like bring a product, but bring the conversation to the fore that like we need fundamentals on how we do access, and it needs to scale. It cannot be something where we again like grind the industry to a halt in like 7 years and say like we're going to do it a different way. And it can't be like a crazy conversation of the form of don't worry, we're going to scan eyeballs and it's going to all be fixed. Look, as an avid sci-fi reader, like I would love a world where like I studied homomorphic encryption. I want like technologies to exist that like with full clarity make it obvious that something happens. But the reality is where we are today, there's so much we can do to actually get us to a point where we're set up to like chip away at and then set the right fundamentals and do like access and authorization properly, which is going
so RBAC isn't carrying us down the street anymore is what I'm hearing.
RBAC, ABAC, REBAC. Have you heard any more? PBAC? I've heard like just put a letter in front of it, honestly.
Throwback. We'll call it all throwback. All right, so we've talked about building good teams. We've talked about passion. We've talked about fitting into that bigger ecosystem. We've talked about the evolution of the startup journey and the startup life. Two questions that kind of tie into a new question, which is, when you talk about fitting into the ecosystem and you talk about that evolutionary journey, at some point you get cozier with the community, the practitioners. You get design partners early, and at some point you get advisors. And I'm really curious for your take on this, because you've got a very interesting, the normalization thing, that's going to stay with me forever here. Just, but how does that one relate to the advisor journey? At some point you bring them on, at some point you need them for a key purpose, and you have a feeling of who makes the best advisors and who you're going to go for and ask to be advisors. Like, what's your criteria there?
Yeah, I mean, one, starting a company, scaling a company, it's hard work, and advisors, they play a special role, right? Like they're everything from SMEs to therapists to conciliaries. Like, I mean, it's and it's very like company dependent also, but a little bit of our DNA was, I built an internal tool at my last job. I got to sort of feel a lot of this pain firsthand. A lot of the early team also sort of had built internal systems at different places. for us, it was really important to have, and especially in the early days, advisors who also understood that pain, who were practitioners themselves, who
Mm-hmm.
also knew what was around the corner. So like that's something that I think is like really helpful when you're scaling a company, like folks you trust who like sort of have a shared understanding of the problem, but also have like this like additive experience to know sort of how to think about things from a different perspective, right? So in our case, like we had a lot of engineering centricity, but maybe, we had to learn a little bit more about like what does it take to actually like roll something out, like a product like ours to like 600 people,
Mm-hmm.
and listen to those learnings. I think also talking to CISOs who've had to maybe uh, argue for like better least privilege, for example, and understand like the inter-team dynamics. Like those perspectives are like incredibly valuable. So, I mean, in short, I think the best advisors are practitioners, maybe not practitioners at the same level as you, but practitioners who have seen different aspects, different industries, different levels. Maybe they're
Mm-hmm.
executives, maybe they're hands-on keyboard. Um, because I think in some sense, like if you can put together a really great brain trust, right, and you can get like this really great feedback, it just helps you up level. Um, and I think a second order effect of that is like, if you've got a team around you that really trusts what you're building and what you're doing, that that advocacy, my belief is it should be organic, right? They should feel like, oh, I actually like I strongly believe in this point of view. I want this to work. I give like, I feel like this is the path, and uh, you know, it's authentic is kind of what I would say. I think like sometimes people get a little bit caught up in sort of like playing the game, and there is a need to sort of like build presence in the market, but at the same time, nothing beats like your users, like, being able to speak on behalf of what they believe is right.
That's awesome. I love that. That's a great answer. Um, Last question. This one's a two-parter. I want to hear uh, why cybersecurity. Like, let's start there. Like, there's a million things you can do on planet Earth, right? And the first question is, why cybersecurity? Like of all the ways you could impact the planet in a positive way, you chose cybersecurity. And then the adjunct question, the second part is, and why specifically be a founder?
It's a great question. For me, there was actually a lot of intentionality behind doing this. I took sabbatical from my last job after having built a prototype of this, and I knew I was excited about the problem, but I'm glad that I had that space to like feel like I stress tested it like with myself, and it's like been one of the reasons why, like, even through the ups and downs of scaling a company, it's like there's been this sense of like, but you know why you're doing this. And for me, like, I reached a point in my career where I wanted to work on something that I felt could have meaningful impact. That was number one. This is an industry, I think, that too often gets sort of waylaid by short-term gains. I am sorry, I don't know if that's
Yeah,
spicy, but it's just the truth, honestly,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I had a lot of conviction that I could rally a team that cared, that maybe didn't even realize that they cared about this problem, and and sort of was excited that it was a really hard problem that no one had solved, and really push. And it was important to me that I work on something in my career that I felt was neutral to positive, is maybe one way I'll put it. Like it's something that actively helps people.
Yeah.
And I do feel like solving these problems in security, like they help people do their jobs. They help them work in better ways. They provide data and visibility and transparency. They build good governance if done well. And I think all of those things, like just from a corporate culture standpoint, like was something like, security when done well is like almost like core to the DNA of your company. It says something about
Yeah.
like your integrity and your sense of responsibility as an organization. I think in our industry, people often have like conversations about should the CEO be responsible for risk? I mean, yes, right? Like, what does it say if like your executive team does not hold like each other like accountable and the
Right.
organization accountable? And so for me, this felt like an opportunity also to like sort of help drive that conversation forward. The third thing is, like, in my experience, having been an academic, I see this kind of widening gap between a lot of really great stuff like people are thinking about like on the academic side and being able to like kind of deploy that like in practical ways in the enterprise. And I want to help us shrink that gap. I want to take sort of the latest and greatest of what's happening, and find applicable ways to make people's lives easier in security using that, because I actually think that there is an opportunity for a renaissance here. So I don't know if that's a satisfying answer. I can go into specifics there, but like to me, it's like not really just about building a cybersecurity product. It's like I feel the kind of excitement I would feel like when I found like a research project, like I was like very, very excited about, you know, like it's like, holy crap, like why is this like not gotten better in like the last 50 years? Like it's not gonna get better by screaming louder and building a bigger booth. Like it's actually, it requires like real depth of thought and a real understanding of the market and like a type of intellectual curiosity that I think has specifically been missing from this space.
Oh, I love that. I love that answer. That's awesome. That is awesome. All right, UK, CEO of Opal Security, thank you so very much for coming and chatting with us. Folks, if you want to learn more about Opal, you can go to founderstories.tv/Opal and learn more. And UK, thanks again.
Thanks for having me, Allan.